All right. Well, welcome everyone to the community conversation session of our Foundations of Social Isolation training series. We are really excited to be bringing you experts to dive into storytelling as a tool for student agency. My name is Frederick. My pronouns are they, them in English and they and a in Spanish. And I am Beyond Differences Professional Development Program Manager. Beyond Differences is a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to empower students to end social isolation and create cultures of belonging. It is my immense privilege to introduce you to Jaryn, Holbrook, Janeway, MBA, SHRM, SCP. They are a bigender speaker, educator, and advocate for the LGBTQIA plus community. Jaryn is the director of programs and operations at Out Youth, an Austin-based nonprofit serving LGBTQIA plus youth for 34 years. Happy birthday, Out Youth. And the co-author of Trans Plus, Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You, a growing up guide for trans and non-binary youth and the adults who love them. Jaryn, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Always a pleasure.
So, our goal with this conversation around storytelling as a tool to build student agency and create cultures of belonging is to talk with different practitioners and organizations in the field of storytelling, learn more about how we can use storytelling to build student agency, end social isolation, and create cultures of belonging. So, this is our opportunity to learn from you all and also spotlight the work that you've been doing to share it with our community. So to start with, I would love for you to share a little bit about your work and your connection to storytelling and or the storytelling space.
Absolutely. So I have worked at Out Youth for nearly 20 years. Started in 2005 and came to the work by accident. I had grown up in a family of teachers and always wanted to be a teacher, but very early on in my life discovered that I was different. And I was told that the kind of different I was bad. And that meant that I couldn't be a teacher. Well, how ironic all of these years later to essentially be a teacher with all the perks and none of the paperwork. Storytelling has always been an integral part of my work, especially at Out Youth, because all too often the stories of marginalized people are erased, lost to history. And I firmly believe that it was our storytelling, our focus on storytelling in 2015, that really turned the tide for Out Youth and its work in Central Texas.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that storytelling work that you were doing without youth in 2015?
I'll tell you the story that I told. Uh, I started as a volunteer in 2005, joined the team as a consultant in 2011, and was largely responsible for the way that Out Youth talked about what it did in the community. I joined as an actual staff member in 2015, and on my very first drop-in night, which is when we open our community center for teenagers, we just finished introductions. We were starting our activity with the teens for that night, and one of the teens stopped me, Andy. And Andy said, You know, you're new here, and there's something that we're hoping that you can help us with. Sure, tell me more. I said, Well, we're hoping that you can change the way that the adults talk about it. I was intrigued because I was the adult that told all the other adults how to talk about it. He said, My mom found you guys on the internet. And the first time she was driving me over here, I was in the back seat and kept asking her questions about Out Youth. And every answer to every question was something about therapy, groups, support, mental health. I was afraid. I thought my mom was taking me to a hospital. I thought we'd arrive at a giant glass building and walk into a white waiting room with people in white coats that took me to white rooms, surrounded by people I didn't know, and forced me to talk about what I went through. And then we pulled up at a little blue house. And I walked in, and it was basically a living room. Felt really warm. And the first thing you all did was ask me what my name and pronouns were. So don't get me wrong, that you all talk about the free therapy that we get here is important, but it misses what's important to us, just that this feels like a home. And for some of us, it's the first home that we've ever known. And so on that day, almost 10 years ago, Andy changed entirely the story that we told about Out Youth. And it's changed the way that the community interacts with us as well, and the way that they understand the life changing and life saving work that we do.
I love that story, and that's not one that I have heard. I I am incredibly grateful to have called the little blue bungalow my professional home for so many years, and am grateful to Andy and you for adjusting that storytelling narrative, because I do think that it's really important, one, to come from the asset based perspective of look at all these wonderful things that we in our community have to offer, but also to really be centering the needs and the experiences of the people we're serving rather than the people who are serving the people that we're serving. Oh, that's amazing. I don't know how I hadn't heard that story before.
From the mouths of babes.
Yeah, always. So tell us a little bit more. I know you have a tremendous background in storytelling. Why is storytelling so important and impactful?
But I'll start personally. I mean, stories are what raised me. Stories are where I found worlds where I could feel safe, that I could imagine a life for myself that was not possible in the present. But for humans, storytelling is wired into us for centuries, millennia. It's all we had. And it's only in the last, let's say, 500 years that we've had the printing press. The written word was reserved for only the most powerful and privileged. So, for the vast majority of human history and for the vast majority of humans, all we had was storytelling. That's how we passed down information, knowledge, value. Because of it, our brains are wired to receive, process, and store information told to us in story in an entirely different way. And it's magic. If we can harness the power of storytelling, we can do wonderful things in the world. But storytelling has also been used for evil. So it's always been my goal to teach our youth, really anyone who would listen, uh, that storytelling is power and it is a privilege, but it is not a requirement that we tell our whole story every time. That there are elements of our story that are okay to keep private, that are okay to change or embellish in order to protect ourselves or others, as long as the core of the story is true. Because the purpose of a story, unless you are presenting factual information that is critical for everyone to be on the same page on, to embellish or shorten or rework, um, it is important to acknowledge. I mean, the story I told you about Andy, I don't know that that's how that happened. That was 10 years ago. But the base of it is real.
You've slept since then.
I have slept since then. So it is that power that uh, I want to pass along to our youth because so often our stories are erased. I mean, Marsha P. Johnson sitting behind me watching over my right shoulder all the time. The history books have declared that she is the one that threw the first brick at Stonewall. But Marsha herself is on the record that she didn't arrive until hours after the riot began. It doesn't mean that I didn't throw glitter all over a brick and use that on my Pride Month altar. Sometimes these pieces of story are important, and the details are certainly important, and the facts are important. But it doesn't change that Marcia did a bunch of wonderful things. It's like our youth are going to go out and do a bunch of wonderful things, and the world needs to know about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think especially for marginalized communities that storytelling piece is kind of at the heart of agency. It's being able to tell our own stories in our own way in our own time. I think about the one of the shared commonalities of folks under the LGBTQIA plus rainbow is the coming out story, or multitude of stories because it's over and over and over again. But how that changes and morphs and adjusts based on who you are and who you're speaking to and the time and the place and the situation, and all of those things can be kind of amorphous and nebulous. um, and so I think a coming out story is a good example of this, but it leads really nicely into the next question. You don't have to speak specifically to coming out, but what does it look like for a story to be refined over time?
A story naturally gets refined over time. It's something that I learned by experience. It will take the story of Andy. The first 100 times I told it probably took 15 minutes to tell the whole story. How long did it take me to tell you? Like, there's a piece of storytelling in the way that we reprocess our stories over and over again and whittle them down to the parts that we know resonate well with others. I mean, I could see it in your face, Frederick. Like, I know exactly when I tell that story when people are going to smile and when they're going to look a little sad for Andy. I know what the points are. And again, it's not about lying, which is something the youth often accuse me of when I try to teach them about storytelling. It's like, you can refine your story. You shouldn't lie. Well, but you're refining your story. You're leaving things out. Isn't that a lie? No, it could be if you weaponize it that way. But again, the heart of storytelling is conveying a piece of information to someone else for a purpose. In my line of work, which is not evil, we try to convey meaning that is hopeful, inspiring, seeks to maintain an oral history that otherwise might disappear. I mean, I have I'm going to say honor, I have the honor of being a banned book author. There are states where kids can't get access to my book. There is nothing stopping humans from erasing each other and their stories and their histories. But if they can hold on to them and tell them out loud, much easier to get rid of, or much harder to get rid of.
Absolutely. And I think whenever we talk about the evolution of storytelling and how um, humans are wired for story, I always think about the multiple ways that humans tell stories. I think about obviously the oral tradition of sitting around the fire, um, but then also songs and music as storytelling, art as storytelling, and all of these different ways that humans have found to convey this is what happened and here's why that's important.
And what we always have to teach our youth is that um, I often I encounter them often at difficult times in their life where they want to tell their story, but they're afraid of how it's going to make the people in their life feel. And I can't take credit for this because I found it on Tumblr. Um, you own everything that's happened to you. So tell your stories. Because if people wanted you to speak kindly of them, they should have behaved better in the first place. Now, we still encourage our youth to be considerate with what they share and when. But the power in storytelling is in the telling. Where we lose power is in how it is received and interpreted. Just like art. You bringing up art always reminds me of that very difficult truth of storytelling. I could go and look at the Mona Lisa today, standing right next to you. And I guarantee both you and I would have different experiences of the story that was being told to us. That doesn't mean that the story is wrong. It doesn't mean that either of us is wrong in our interpretation necessarily. we all view the world through our unique lens. So having to teach our youth that there is power in their storytelling, but then they may not always have control over what happens to it, can often be difficult.
Absolutely. One of the things that we are creating as part of this Foundations of Social Isolation training series is a guidebook for youth on setting, communicating, and maintaining boundaries. And I think that storytelling piece connects to this so viscerally in my mind that, um, like you said, you have control over how you tell your story and to whom and when. And thinking about what it means to tell your story safely and create that safe container for yourself to share with someone, um, and how to maintain healthy boundaries when you're sharing something with someone. And I know that that's one of the things that comes up a lot with the youth.
When it's something that I was going to say adults. You've known me long enough, Frederick. I don't think that adults have all the answers. In fact, oftentimes I think that we forget the things that we knew when we were younger, uh, that are important to remember when working with youth. The reality, though, is that their brains are not fully developed. And so helping guide them into telling their stories in ways that are authentic and not embellished, that they are doing so not to curry favor or look cooler than their peers. Uh, Not that there's not a time and place for that. The kind of storytelling I think you and I are talking about, that is not the time uh, for those kind of outlandish stories that I know I was guilty of telling when I was a teenager, and admittedly still guilty of telling on occasion. That's the nature of storytelling, isn't it? We we also owe our youth the education of how to receive a story and analyze it, because they live in a world that's entirely different than I was born into. And the internet barely existed when I came into existence. And now misinformation abounds, uh, at least online. Those then get shared in the real world.
And
And the
everything's permanent.
proliferation is exactly making sure that they understand as best we can the long term ramifications of putting things out there.
Hmm. Absolutely.
We don't want to do harm.
Our next day of action at Beyond Differences is called Be Kind Online Day, and it's on May 10th. And we have shifted our focus in recent years from kind of the boogeyman of the internet and social media to an acceptance that the internet's probably here to stay. And we should figure out how to help the youth figure out how to be responsible digital citizens, how to be kinder online, how to create belonging online. Um, and so I am kind of combining my ideas right now with our upcoming Be Kind Online Day with what we're talking about here with storytelling. And I would love your take on how have you seen storytelling successfully used on the internet, to create cultures of belonging?
But we'll use Out Youth as the example, mostly because it's where I have the most experience. It is my firmly held belief that the reason that the internet, especially social media, has become so powerful is that at the end of everything, when you boil a human all the way down, we are terribly afraid of being alone. And so, what we strive to do at Out Youth is teach them first the difference between being lonely and being alone, because they are two different things. We often do things when we are feeling lonely that we wouldn't otherwise do. We share things about ourselves that we otherwise wouldn't. As far as in the online space, the benefit of storytelling in my work is that by telling Out Youth's stories over and over again online, we're able to reach youth everywhere. And I mean it. I was probably best known at Out Youth for a very long time as being the one that said that the internet was not the future. That there was no possible way that a virtual drop-in space, a virtual support network, something online would ever work. And then on March 13th, 2020, we got the shelter-in-place order because of the COVID pandemic. And in less than 48 hours, everything at Out Youth was online. And it
I
was
remember.
successful. Heck, it was even more than successful. We did things that brought people together and made them feel less alone because of the stories we told. Heck, you probably remember that I did story time that whole
I
first
do.
week.
I do.
Those videos are still on YouTube. For those of you who were not there, I would log on to Zoom every night at 8 p.m. Central Time and read for an hour from a series of LGBT themed young adult novels. Story time every night because I knew that it made me feel good when I was a kid. So I figured I'd pass it along. Power of story, it doesn't even have to be our own. It's the simple nature of coming together to share a story, to share in the imagination of a different time, a different place, a different world, can have its own power and its magic in it.
Oh, I love that. It's always my pleasure to get to share any space with you, but especially when we get to talk about storytelling. Um, I am so grateful for your time. Before we wrap, I do want to be conscious of time. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience? A final thought? Any events that you have coming up that folks can attend? Also, how can people connect with you? Social media, websites, whatnot.
Absolutely. So the thing I have coming up imminently next week, I will be presenting twice, 2 days in a row at Centerlink's online e-summit. Centerlink is the community center of community centers serving the LGBTQ community. So I'll be presenting one day on HR 101, all the top 10 things any nonprofit needs to know with HR. Definitely not at all based on the things that I've learned now being in HR. And then the second day, I'll be co-presenting with Ryan Dillon, our programs manager on Out Youth's youth development model. So in 2015, again, when I began as a staff member, I said, how do we prove that we are making youth better? Then when they found us and everyone said, well, we just tell each other stories, we provide anecdotal evidence, and that wasn't enough for me. So we developed our own youth development model. So Ryan and I will be talking through how we do that. As for those folks that want to get in touch, the best way is by email, Jaryn@outyouth.org. This may come as a surprise to Frederick. I couldn't tell you the last time I logged into social media. I don't want to be one of those people that's like, I gave up social media and my life is 1,000% better, because it's not 100% true. I am still on Discord and I watch short videos on YouTube, but please don't message me on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or any of the other things. I'm probably not going to see it. Just email me. Or get in touch through Out Youth. There's always a way to find me there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. We are super grateful to have had this time and space with you. Is there any parting thoughts?
I think it bears repeating. Tell your stories. There's power and magic in them. And once you figure out how to tell your own story, help everyone else figure out how to tell theirs, no matter who they are. It's the beautiful thing about having 8 billion of us on the planet. We will never have a shortage of stories.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Take good care of yourself, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye.